Trendsetter, I got style for you. Ain't seen you at the top, it's been a while for you. Big you up and they look down on you. Take one loss, no one's around for you. I won't stop, no, 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 no. I won't stop, I won't stop. I won't stop, no, no.
Thank you for joining us today, Rio, at another episode of Humanity Assembled podcast. This is Rio Veradonir. How'd I do?
Close. There's an R. Veradonir.
Veradonir. Okay, almost
That's
had
right,
it.
yeah.
And he is the editor-in-chief of Queer Majority. So thank you for joining us. We actually met on another podcast where we got along relatively well. I assume today's not going to be any different.
Sure.
But there was one area that I did want to probe a little deeper because it did, I don't know, it kind of caught me off guard when I was reading the bio. So let's just jump right in. I'm going to ask you about it and then you can, let's just go from there. Let's just dive in. Okay.
Yeah, sounds great.
So Queer Majority, when I was reading your about section, it really is what it says, like in the name. So it says here, like, most people are queer, bisexuality is common. You really do believe that most people fall somewhere on the queer spectrum? Can you?
That's two ways of answering that question. The first one is to say that the way we're using queer is not a synonym for LGB or even LGBT. It also applies to a lot of straight people. And so we do believe that a majority of the population is queer, or depending on how you think about it, really even it could be universal. It could be that 100% of the population is queer, the way we're using it, not as a synonym for LGB. So it's a broad term for people who do not conform 100% with all real or perceived norms around sex and relationships. So a stay-at-home dad, for example, would qualify as queer according to our definition, even if he's completely heterosexual, because he's deviating from cultural norms around what is considered typical male behavior.
Okay, so it says, we employ the term queer, intentionally broad, to describe sexual, gender, relationship, intimacy, non-conforming. So you're giving the example of the dad, but would that be atypical?
Well, unlike LGB, which is a scientifically testable, real material thing that exists, right? So, for example, our organization funded a study where they measured men's arousal responses and proved that some significant percentage of the male population is actually bisexual, scientifically speaking, in terms of attraction to both males and females. Unlike that, queerness as a broader concept, the way we're using it here, is really just a commentary on human culture. It's not making any objective scientific claim. And what it's basically just another way of saying that we're all individuals. That if society allows people to be free, that we're all going to differ from norms in one way or another. A common example of that would be like, if you, how do I put this? If you buy clothes off the rack, right? It's not going to fit most people perfectly, which is why you have to have it tailored if you want to have a good fit. There is an average arm length, and there is an average shoulder width, and there is an average leg length, but it's extremely rare for any one person to be exactly average in all of those ways. Okay. So if you apply that to the concept of sex, relationships, and romance, and dating, and family, and all of that, it turns out that basically everybody deviates from norms in one way or another, even if they stick to the norms in, say, 99% of the cases.
Okay. And you also say bisexuality is common on your website. Now, I guess here's what rubs me wrong about the whole thing. The queer majority, the bisexuality is common. The most people are queer, right? Most people are not going to look into how you're redefining what it means to be queer. Because it really looks like you are seeking to redefine what the term queer means.
It's a fair point.
So most people aren't going to look into that. Now, for consenting adults, fine. But I come at it, I think I told you this on the podcast. I'm a mom, right? I'm running for school board. I come at it from a mom position. So and I have 2 sets of kids. So I have one daughter who's 30, that I was a teenage mom, and then I have 2 teenagers. So my daughter that was 30 was not influenced or had to really worry about, all the LGBTQ issues. She didn't really have to worry about all the sexuality issues. It wasn't so much in the face of kids then. Fast forward now to my second, generation of kids. And you probably know the stats. It's an extremely high number. Give me the number, because I know you probably know it.
Well, it kind of depends. There are different polls. It looks like if you're they want to get the highest possible number of people to identify as LGBT, you're going to do that by narrowing it down to young people from very affluent, educated backgrounds. So shockingly, for example, about 2/3 of incoming freshmen at Cambridge University identify as LGBT. But that's because we're dealing with very young people and also people who come from an extremely affluent, educated background. So they're much more likely to come from a family which is accepting of that. In the general population, it's lower. It's more like 15 to 30%, depending on the poll you look at, who among very young people, young adults.
I'll have to get that statistic. And I'm going to put it, when I post this, I'll put it in the notes. But when I saw it, it was an extremely high, and it was high school kids, adolescents, kids that somehow identified on the spectrum of being gay, bisexual, trans, one of those. It's astonishing. I mean, I really feel like now parents really have to parents really have to be expected to confront this issue of sexuality. What am I, in a way that we never did before? And I think and so that's my problem with the queer majority and the blurring the lines of sexuality that we're doing now, and all the, the loosey-goosey, right? And I'm not transphobic. Like I'm not going to say like, oh, because I hate that I have a Black friend, so I'm not going to do that to you, right? I'm not, homophobic. I'm not at all.
I believe you.
I'm coming at it from the children perspective, the kids now, the extremely high number. And so it rubs me the wrong way when I see something and it's like, okay, most people are queer. Because that's the headline. I mean, when I read, and I think I'm a pretty intelligent person. So when I read your about,
not a question.
That's what I kind of took from it. Most people are queer. And then the way the kids then interpret it is not that we want them to think that there's anything wrong with being gay or bisexual if they really are, but how much of that now becomes a trend or a fad or a even pressure to be it, because, well, of course most people are.
Yeah. Please allow me to address all of your extremely good points. I mean, I basically agree with everything that you've said. So one area where I would clarify is we're not really redefining queer. We're actually taking it back to its original meaning before it was used exclusively to refer to LGBT people. There's an article, which I wrote myself actually at Queer Majority, that you can read, called "Queerness is Universal." And I give historical examples about the original meaning of the word and so forth. But nevertheless, your general point is completely accurate, which is if the average person thinks of it as meaning a synonym for LGBT, then that certainly can be misleading or confusing to that person. As far as a defense of our use of the word goes, I would just say Queer Majority isn't really written for a young audience. I'm the assistant director of the American Institute of Bisexuality, which also funds other projects, including bi.org, which is actually made for younger people. And it doesn't even touch any of the very sophisticated, more adult content that Queer Majority does. we made a very conscious effort not to make the mistake that a lot of other LGBT orgs do of only having one source for both minors and adults. That's not a good idea. I don't support that. I think it's extremely important that content that is being given to minors is appropriate and age appropriate. And what's appropriate for a 10-year-old is not the same thing as what's appropriate for a 17-year-old. And what's appropriate for a 17-year-old isn't the same thing that's appropriate for a 30-year-old, which is more like the average QM reader. So our audience for Queer Majority is very educated and mature. We're not targeting young people with that content. We have specific other projects for young people.
Okay, so bi.org is towards young people.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, everywhere from teenagers up to like young adults, basically. So QM's average age would be like the top end of what bi.org is targeting.
Okay, so bi.org is also part of your publication?
It's another project of the same organization.
Okay. So I just turned to it, and the first thing I see is learn about famous bi people. And it's a, pretty hip looking, maybe late teens, early 20s.
Yeah.
And then it has bi representation in fiction.
Mm-hmm.
It has, what else? It looks like an anime bi book club. I'm almost scared to click on that one. And then it has some articles. So why do kids need to learn about other, I guess, bi teenagers, if not to then increase the fad and to make it more trendy?
Oh, okay, great. Very good question. I like that. So setting aside the fact that we already agree that there's different standards for what's acceptable. I think that teaching young people that, for example, some people have two dads or whatever and that's even for very young people, is a perfectly appropriate thing to do because it's not about sex, right? When it comes to, kind of like post-pubescent young people, as they start to have sexual feelings, it is also important that they get some sex education. And I think that I probably am I'm definitely a bit more conservative than your average LGBT activist in terms of how far I think that it's acceptable to go when it comes to sex education. But I am less conservative than somebody who thinks that minors shouldn't receive any sex education.
Okay, so let me pause you there. Let me pause to redirect what my question was. This is as a mom, right? So I'll tell you a little story. When we were in California and my daughter, who's now 14, she was in preschool and her friend had two moms. And immediately I'm like, oh my goodness, how do I explain this to my daughter who's like 4? I never had to.
No.
Because the sex part was never thrown on her. You know what I mean? It was just, she has two moms and she didn't think anything
with a person that young. That would be incredibly inappropriate. So
right. My question is, so I get that part. My question is, I'm opening up bi.org. This is made for teenagers and up, right?
That's right.
Target audience. Why do they care about famous bi people or bi people in movies or why does it matter?
That's a really good question. I'm going to answer that by way of addressing another question, which was also an excellent question that I haven't addressed yet, which is, what do we mean by bisexuality being common? And the answer to that question, and there are scientific studies to back this up as well. This is an objective claim, and it's true. Bisexuality is quite common. It exists in over 4,000 species of animals that we've looked at, whereas exclusive lifelong homosexuality is exceedingly rare. It actually doesn't exist at all in nature. We've only seen exclusive lifelong homosexuality in humans and domestic rams, both of which are highly influenced by human culture. So if you think about it, there is a Darwinian paradox, which is, how could homosexuality be common? And the answer to that is, it's not. The vast majority, if not all, same-sex attraction in nature, not humans. Some humans are exclusively homosexual, it turns out, but it's a very rare thing in nature. And it's a rare thing among human beings. if half of the population was saying I'm exclusively gay, that would indeed be very weird. That would be contrary to the laws of nature. It's extremely unlikely that that would happen. And in fact, it isn't the case. Bisexuality, on the other hand, is common because you are, as long as you're still attracted to the opposite sex, you're still very likely to procreate. And so there's no reason for evolution to choose against that, is the answer to the question. So bisexuality is common. Whether or not it's actually 2/3 of the population is very debatable, but it is certainly common. And so given the fact that it's common, a significant percentage of young people are going to grow up, and as they start to mature, they're going to start having feelings and they're going to be confused about them. And part of good sex education, which is age appropriate, is to help them understand the facts about science. I don't believe that schools should be indoctrinating kids in political positions. I think that's deeply wrong, especially if they're funded by taxpayers. I think politics should be kept out of it. I'm a swing voter myself. I'm not here to push partisan politics with my activism. But facts about human biology, if it's age appropriate, is an important thing to teach young people. And as they start to realize, like, oh, I think I might be bisexual, for them to be able to look and say, oh my gosh, Angelina Jolie is bi too. Okay, that makes me feel a little better about myself because this really cool person who I look up to is also bi. That's the main reason for it. I will say that there is a kind of postmodern, anti-scientific, far-left, neo-Marxist, frankly, style of LGBT activism, which is pushed by a vocal minority of LGBT people and is opposed by most of us, which actually does aim to erase the very existence of biological sex and to try to, quote, queer everything, which in the context of a critical approach, as opposed to a liberal one, which is one we're using, the critical approach to queering things is actually to confuse society and try to make it so that everybody thinks that they actually are gay or whatever. And that's wild and completely goes against the laws of nature and science and logic. And that's a bad thing. But the way to avoid allowing that vocal minority to push their crazy ideas on society is to embrace an actual logical, fact-based, reasonable, moderate approach to LGBT issues, not to oppose the human rights of real LGBT people.
I hear you.
Yeah.
But, and I think as a spokesperson for your organization, you really are the perfect person. I mean, I haven't met anyone else, but you really are a good person because you are more on the conservative side. You're likable, you're intelligent, you're articulate, and you filibuster the answer just a little bit.
If I did, it wasn't intentional. So please help me. By the way, thank you for those compliments. That's really lovely. I appreciate that.
Yeah, because as a mom, and as a aunt who, has a child or has a nephew who struggles with defining what a sexuality has for a while, right? If I want to then help them get educated, and if I'm picking up your organization, and if the very first thing I see is, hey, these famous people are bi, so yeah, you should be bi too. That's, as a conservative mom, that rubs me the wrong way. Now, I will tell you, before I lived in Arizona, I was in Mississippi for about maybe 4 or 5 years. And when I was in Mississippi, I'm thinking, I'm moving from California to Mississippi. I'm going to be in this super, conservative culture. And I'm smack dab in the middle of, I don't even know what, right? So I pulled the kids out of traditional school, started homeschooling them, started them in a co-op. And I would say a good chunk of those girls also were struggling with their sexuality. And because they were older than my daughters, I had to pull them out of the co-op and start homeschooling 100%. Only because as parents, I think it's our job first to help educate our children about their sexuality before society tells them anything about it, right? And it's kind of hard. I mean, it's an uphill battle because you have TikTok, you have YouTube, and then you have the kids at school. And if everybody thinks that they're on the spectrum, somewhere, then it's a really hard fight for a mom. And it's not that I wouldn't love my daughters if they came out and they said, "Hey, mom, I'm bisexual or I'm gay," because of course I would. But I want to make sure that that's their authentic choice rather than what society is telling them that it's cool, right?
I completely agree. And I just, if I wasn't clear enough answering that, let me be more clear. Even Bite.org, which is targeting a younger audience, it's also really targeting people who already think they might be bisexual. If somebody's Googling, am I bisexual or whatever, it's because they're already questioning their sexuality. When it comes to, and we've done this too, by the way, provided we've funded and helped produce actual sex ed books intended for use in high schools and so forth. And when it comes to educating people who, the majority of whom probably are not bisexual, right? If you're educating the general population, most of whom are at a minimum mostly heterosexual, right? And by the way, most of the people who identify as bi are probably what you would call heteroflexible, which is to say they're primarily attracted to the opposite sex. And they just have some attraction to the same sex, which is a very different thing from being somebody who is mostly attracted to the same sex. It's a very different experience to have as a person, obviously, right? And the most common form of bisexuality is that heteroflexible, mostly straight share of the population. But when you're talking to a group of a classroom, you think it's really important to make sure that they understand that homosexuality is rare. So some small percentage of the population is homosexual. Heterosexuality is extremely common, and it is the norm. And there's nothing wrong with telling people that. And educators who don't are doing a disservice to the students and to the parents of those students. I also think it's really important, especially when it comes to public school, that we have conversations like this, where we discuss it as a society, and we say, hey, where do we draw the line? What do we think is and isn't age appropriate, and so forth. And we, as a democracy, have to come to a consensus about that. And I think it's extremely wrong that a vocal minority has used the school system to push some ideas that are deeply unpopular and untrue. And so we're allies in opposition to that. By the way, it's not just LGBT issues, unfortunately. It's the entire education system that has been taken over by critical pedagogy, which was literally invented by a Catholic socialist named Paulo Freire. So
I think
it's not just sex ed, it's everything. I think
that's where we differ. Like, I personally don't want sex ed taught at all.
Okay. That's fair.
Like, don't even teach my kids anything about sex, anything about their sexuality at all, because most parents are kind of fed up with it and do not trust teachers to just teach the birds and the bees. So don't teach them at all. Like, let me opt out, or just let it be universal that sex education and matters of sexuality should not be taught. Another thing that's really interesting, I don't know, maybe I'm getting old, but is I think this should be like an unwritten rule. I don't know. I'm wanting to withdraw my words as I'm saying them, but they're out now. I think it should be an unwritten rule that teachers should lock down their social media. Because on more than one occasion, like, my child has come home and like, oh, look at so-and-so's Instagram or so-and-so, like, I remember my teachers as Ms. Smith. I didn't know if Miss Smith had a husband. Maybe I did, he or she had her husband or what. But you knew very little when we were in school about Miss Smith. Miss Smith was our teacher, and that was it. Sure. Like, why do we have to know now that, your teacher is bisexual? Like, we should know that. But that's like a huge tangent. Okay, so how can parents, you and I may never be natural allies, right?
I think you are. I'm not as far off from you as you think I am.
But how can parents at least get to the point where you understand how we feel And there may be maybe a chance to be like some allyship. Like, for instance,
Yes.
I would love to help as a mom consult
Mhm.
on better ways your website could be formed that wouldn't be offensive to moms, right? Maybe when you first open it, it should be a big disclaimer, this website is best suited for 18 and up or 16 and up, or, so that, my 14-year-old isn't viewing that, right? Maybe don't lead with, hey, these are the cool people that are also, bi. Maybe
Yeah.
that's somewhere further down the road, so and I think sometimes conservative moms are out here sounding like crazy women, with their heads cut off just because they're in such a panic about their children. And anytime we get to the point when we're in a panic about our children, we're going to be the mama bear, right?
Sure.
And are bears reasonable and rational? No, they're
Mhm.
ready to take your heads off when they see you.
Yeah.
The one thing
So please finish your thoughts. Sorry.
one other story. So again, I'm in Mississippi and I'm in my local bookstore, and one of the clerks is transgender. And so at that point in time, I'm just beside myself because I'm not really understanding how in conservative Mississippi, my homeschool class that I was teaching at the time has such a high proportion of kids that are really questioning their sexuality. So I'm just chatting with her and I'm telling her the situation, and I'm like, what do I do? What do I tell these kids? Like, would you have made the same choice? You know what I mean? I'm just talking to her. And she was like, honey, bring them to me and I will tell them that this, you know what I mean? And she just gave me flat advice that, this is something that she wouldn't have chose if she really didn't feel like it was her. It's it's not a trend. It's nothing to play around. She gave me some sage advice, and she was willing to, to then, I mean, of course I'm not going to march my homeschool class down there. Right. But that would be somebody that I would be willing to to talk to my kids if my kids were struggling in that area. How do we get to the point where moms can be allies, and so that you can understand we don't need you to teach our kids sexuality? Like most conservative moms that are invested in their kids, we have this, and it's not like, and it's not the 1950s, so we're not out here telling our kids you're going to hell if you know what I mean. Most of us aren't doing that. There might be some.
There's so much to say about all that. Yeah, I mean, you're right. We do disagree about whether or not any sex education is appropriate, especially for older kids. That said, that's okay. We live in a democracy and we can disagree about that. I do think that the average parent probably would want to at least eradicate the kind of anti-scientific, politically motivated, dogmatic stuff that's in our schools right now. And I think that needs to go. It might even. Sorry, please. There's so much to say. I want to be able to get this out.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, but by the way, it might be possible to do that through the Supreme Court, and I would welcome that. I think that some parents should probably sue the school system and say critical social justice ideology is a religion, and critical pedagogy was invented by a Catholic socialist to push a religious perspective, and therefore it's unconstitutional for it to be in schools. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean it's unconstitutional to teach sex ed or to teach about human rights and so forth, but it is very unconstitutional to teach this specific, radical, hyper-political, anti-scientific, false, frankly, narrative that is being taught to a lot of our kids right now. And again, not just around LGBT issues, but also around every other issue imaginable. It's even infecting mathematics, if you can believe it. It's crazy. So we are allies on that. And I think that if we put it to a plebiscite and a majority of parents agree with you that we shouldn't have any sex ed in public schools, then as a good classical liberal, I would support that, because that would be a democratic choice that parents made, and that's what would happen. Another way that we can talk about this is supporting school choice. And I think that it's really important to make it easier for lower income people to take advantage of the real marketplace in education and get their kids into private schools where they can have more control over what their kids do and don't learn. Because a private school isn't subject to the democratic process the way that a public school is. So if it turns out that a majority of parents agree with me and believe in a much toned down, much more accurate, much less political style of sex education, then you as a parent should absolutely have the right to opt out of that and send your kids to a non-public school, and it shouldn't break the bank for you to do that. And I would support that completely. And I do support that publicly. I've said so. And I just said it again for all of your listeners. Oh, I would encourage you, and I know you know this, the vast majority of the population is supportive of LGBT rights and would not abuse their children. There is, however, a minority of parents who really will push some of those ideas. And as you can imagine, growing up as a young gay person or bi person and being told by your parents that you're going to burn in hell for all eternity because of something that you can't control is a deeply, deeply upsetting experience. And I think we can agree that, I mean, maybe the solution to that isn't obvious, and maybe the government isn't the way to solve it. But as a society, as a culture, we need to all agree not to harm children like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would, and again, this is a little outside of my wheelhouse, this part, right?
That's okay.
But I would say I grew up a very kind of Pentecostal apostolic, you're going to hell for everything, right? So I know, and I was one that got pregnant when I was 16, and I got stood up in the church. So I know what that ostracization feels like, just in my own experience. And so I would hope that we have moved past that as a society, and that we're no longer doing those things to our children, whether it be teenage moms in the church, or whether it be, homosexuality in the church, or bi, or any. I would hope that we have moved past telling our kids they're going to hell for,
we need a bit more love in our Christianities, maybe. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think
that's the ultimate teaching is love, and that's something that unfortunately some versions of Christianity lose sight of. So,
yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of that still out there. I guess my final thought would be this. I'm glad we had this talk again, because I kind of feel like, I don't know, maybe I was the only one that read the about description and that had an issue with it.
I'm sure you're not.
But now that you explained it, it's a little clearer. I still don't think we totally agree, but I think that there is some, understanding there. Yes. I would say, as consenting adults, if you are pushing these, everybody's kind of on the spectrum somewhere, my words, not yours.
Yeah. And to be clear, I don't believe that. like I said, by the way, trans is even more rare than exclusive homosexuality. It's a fraction of 1% of the population that's actually transsexual. So
right.
Bisexuality is common, but gay and trans people are pretty rare.
Okay. I just see it as almost an epidemic among our children that they're facing, because these kids have so much pressure today. Their sexuality, by the time they're entering into middle school, they're already faced with it. When before we really didn't have to worry about it until like high school. But now, late elementary school, if not in elementary school, like they're faced and they're learning about it and they're having to deal with it, And then you have everything else that's going on in the world, right? So, and our kids are really feeling the brunt of it. So if you guys are, and it looks like this website might be new, the bi.org website.
No, it's been around a while. Queer majority is newer.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe you guys could have like a parental advisory group, right?
I'm open to considering that, and I definitely think that your offer to advise us and give us your perspective as a conservative mom would certainly be welcome.
Yeah, if you don't talk to people that you have a difference of opinion with, right? then how will you ever, one, make any change, or two, maybe if not change, at least if I understand your position, you understand my position, we might be able to stop hating each other so much, right?
Well,
and I'm just speaking like the larger us, not
yes,
you and I.
there are people who actually do hate people like me, and I'm happy to hate them back. But they're a very small percentage of the population. The vast majority of conservative people are, pro human rights and only want what's best for themselves and their kids. And I agree with them about that.
Right. No, for sure. But yeah, but thank you for, having this secondary chat with us. And then I found this new site that I'm definitely gonna dive into, especially the Ophelia After All. I'm interested to see what that's about.
Oh, I don't know. I don't edit that, but
yeah, it's one of the books. So it's the book club.
Okay.
So I'm interested to see, because like I said, I am running for school board. I do have teenagers that are almost over the hump. I talk to kids, I interact with teen kids all the time. So I think I do have a good idea of what they're facing and the pressures. And it's funny because as I'm talking to my kids and their friends, they're so much more sophisticated than we were at their age. And I think a lot of it does have to do with this being at their fingertips.
Oh, for sure. And, there are better and worse ways of using that tool. And an important part of being a good parent is to make sure kids understand that they can't believe everything they read on the internet, and that some stuff that's out there isn't appropriate for them and they shouldn't look at it and so forth. So, that's another relevant point here, is even if we do create maximal school choice and you are able to opt out one way or another from your kids being exposed to sex education, not because you want to keep them ignorant, but because you want to teach them yourself, which I think is a wonderful thing. Not all kids are lucky enough to have a smart, reasonable parent, or even a loving one like you. So your kids are very lucky. And I would like to believe that the majority of parents are like you. I think they probably are. But yeah, even if you could opt out of sex education in schools, they're going to be exposed to it somewhere. At the end of the day, if they want to find information, they're going to find it. And even if they don't have a phone, they're going to do it when they're at a friend's house or something. So you're right. I think that it is very smart of you to want to get ahead of that, because that's the only thing you can do, is make sure that the first exposure that they get comes from you, so that when they come across stuff like that, they can say, oh, this is that thing mom told me about. And boy, what an unfortunate challenge to have to face. But we live in a crazy world, and the internet has changed things for better and worse.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I feel like I learned something today.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
And you helped me check my bias, because one thing that I'm always trying to do is just kind of keep a check on my own self. And you're right. I do have to remember that not all parents are, like myself and my husband.
If only.
Not all parents. And if we do totally, walk through life thinking that everybody is like we are, then we are going to be missing a huge chunk of kids. So thank you for that.
And unfortunately, again, I'm open to other solutions to this that don't involve the government. I generally support smaller government, and I think that maximum freedom is a good thing. But we do have a problem where, some parents are going to not only keep their kids ignorant, but maybe also teach them things that are false themselves. And when you have, then you have a hormone-addled 17-year-old or even a 19-year-old who has not been educated at all by their parents, and they've been kept ignorant, they're much more likely to get a sexually transmitted disease. They're much more likely to get pregnant when they're too young, before it might impact their, obviously you turned out really well, so good for you, but a lot of people, when they get pregnant young, it can really throw their life off kilter and make it so that they're less successful because they don't do as well in school or whatever, right? And so if it's not government, we do need some way to ensure that children who are not being properly cared for by their parents are getting that information somewhere. And I guess that might have to be the internet in their case. And hopefully they find our site and not one of the crazy far left ones.
Right. And, I don't know everything. I can admit that, there's a lot of things that I don't know, especially about, this issue. And so I hope, Rio, that you're going to be my new friend, that I can email you if I have,
Absolutely. And if you find anything on bi.org that you think is age inappropriate, please feel free to tell me, because that we do have a whole other project where more adult stuff should be going. And I will pass on your feedback to the actual editor of bi.org if you find something like that.
Nice. And I think we need allies, like I said, hopefully I'll be on the school board, and I'm sure there's going to be issues that come up that I might need your, expert advice in, and, so.
I'd vote for you if I lived in the same district.
All right. Thank you, Rio, for joining me. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah. And I will talk to you again in the future, I'm sure.
Sounds great, Christy. Have a good day.
It's
Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be notified when we drop videos in the future. Follow us on our other platforms and continue to help us build humanity one piece at a time.